Hey all. So about a year ago, I announced the release of the Dolmen. But at the time, I was dealing with mental and physical health issues that were just getting worse and getting the better of me, to be honest. And that kind of messed up everything, which sucked because this is a really important piece of work for me. And I was really excited about it, and it had a lot of meaning to it for me, bunch of different ways. And yeah, so, it just, I just various plans on, just how I was going to promote it and, just getting a page on my website for it. And none of these things happened. And even, I took a bunch of pre-orders and those got messed up along with my other orders. It was just, the whole year just kind of sucked, even though I was working on this and this was something that I was excited about. But, it's like one of those things where when you have something good going on that you can't fully appreciate and enjoy because of the other shit that's going on in your life, it really messes you up. So anyway, and by the time November rolled around, I was in the hospital and kind of just finally shut me down completely. And around sometime in November, I started feeling better and recovering, and I was like, okay, well, I got to try to get all the orders that haven't been shipped out, try to get working on those and get them out. And I told myself, I'm going to do a do-over with Dolmen. I'm going to do a new video, just a whole new presentation, because, now I'm in a better state of mind, and just everything is, so much better now, and this is more of the headspace I want to be in to do all this. So, I figure I'm going to do just a big old overview of the Dolmen, and I'm going to start off by telling you about the origins of the circuit and, kind of why and what is important to me about it. I'm a big fan of special purpose ICs. Special purpose ICs, in a way, I guess it could be almost any IC in a way, but they're ICs that are designed to have a particular function, as opposed to a, op-amp IC where, it's a building block for a much bigger circuit. Special functions, special purpose ICs have a whole big circuit jammed inside of one package, and then, it's made so that you can simplify a big, function into, something smaller with, of course, external components of some amount to, be able to adjust parameters and shit like that. And one of the things that I love to do with these, especially the older, obsolete, out of production ones that have something to do with audio or not, even ones that aren't really intended for audio, I've found ways to. But what I like to do is kind of repurpose them, meaning I take them and I find a new way to use them while working with what's there. And also, I, do this thing where, I kind of crack the code of the chip by finding things that it can do that it was never meant to do. You know, like on some ICs, there'll be like pins that you're not really supposed to use. You're supposed to leave them unconnected. And sometimes, like on the data sheet, it will say NC, meaning like you don't have to connect anything to these. They don't have any function. And those are usually either they're there just because the package has to have, you know, an even number of pins on each side of it. That's what DIP means, DIP, dual inline pins, I guess. But anyway, sometimes those pins still do something, and then there'll also be pins that say, like, test. And those are meant for, you know, some computer in the factory to use those pins to test to make sure that the pin functions properly. And those almost always have something going on there. One of the other knob here is is a test pin, essentially, or, you know, a pin that's not supposed to be used. So anyway, you know, that's part of what I love about design. I love designing. That's like my favorite thing in the whole freaking universe to do. I could do it 24/7 and never ever get bored with it. It's like this exploratory thing, you know. And how I do it, you know, like I don't sit down and say, I'm going to design a thing that does this. That's not how it works. I have been designing for, you know, almost decades at this point, and my first design led to every other design that I have, because I'll be experimenting with a simple circuit, and that will teach me some things and give me ideas for another circuit, and that circuit will branch off into other circuit, you know, and it just keeps going like that. And I just keep exploring, and I keep my ear open, you know, like my mental ear open, and so if I hear something, I'm like, okay, what, you know, whether it's, you know, some chaotic noise or some kind of particular timbre change to the sound or whatever, I say, okay, what is doing that? Why did that just happen? And, you know, from the very beginning, when I didn't know what the hell I was doing, I would always just be like, I wonder what will happen if I connect this point to this point. And sometimes it does nothing. Sometimes it destroys the IC that I'm messing with, or the transistor. You know, literally, I've had fires on, you know, erupt on my breadboard. Like every single one of my breadboards, I have a ton of like really large breadboards, all full of circuits, and each one of them at some point on there, you'll see a little area where it's like, instead of being this white plastic, it's kind of dark brown or light brown, and like that's where something blew up or caught on fire. But anyway, it's, you know, it's for the cause, so it's okay, you know. But I've learned certain things to try that you wouldn't normally do, because I'm, you know, when I hear something crazy and messed up, I'm like, you know, that's kind of stuff I like. So I'm like, okay, what does that? Okay, I'm going to remember that now, and I'll write it down, and I'll use that for future designs. And so, let's see here, around like sometime in the mid-90s, at that point, the music I was playing was like kind of harsh noise, essentially, you know, a lot of mixer feedback and pedals just all patched together. And I went into a Radio Shack one day, and they had a table of like for things that were for sale, clearance or something like that. And one of the things was this toy megaphone that changed your voice when you spoke into it. Made it sound like a robot, or made it sound like alien, which is just the pitch, bringing the pitch up or bringing the pitch down, or just amplifying it. And so I bought that. I ripped out the guts. I put it into a box with a, Radio Shack box with a 1/4-inch inputs and outputs that I bought from Radio Shack, of course. And I used it in my rig, and it didn't do anything as cool as the actual chip that was in it could do, but it created this amount of noise within the system, so it was good. It was something I used a lot. It was like a permanent part of my rig. And then at some point, I kind of moved on from playing that and playing more kind of started playing with a guitarist, so it was like more like kind of this like cosmic, krautrock kind of thing. I don't know. But anyway, I wasn't using the same equipment anymore. I was using like test oscillators and echo and shit. And so that box just kind of got put into a box of various junk that I have carried throughout the years with me. Fast forward to like 2012, after I started Mountain King, and I was sitting at my like solder bench where I build, and on top of one of the parts cabinets in front of me was that box. I don't even know what, I must have found it and just sat it there. And I was just like working, and I look at it, and it just dawns on me. I'm like, I don't even know what's inside, what that circuit is like. I have no idea. Like, I don't remember, and I don't, because when I, boxed it up like that, I just didn't know that much about electronics at the time. I just didn't understand the workings of circuitry as much. I knew how to like, modify shit and tweak stuff here and there, but it was very like, an anarchy version of that. But, so I was like, let me check that out. I've always been, since I was as young as can go back in my memories, I would take shit apart because I wanted to know what was going on inside of it. And I would look inside, and I didn't necessarily know what I was looking at, but like my brain just wanted to, it's my ADHD, just always like having to like, it needs to be fed, information. And so I opened it up and I looked at it, and I saw there's 2 chips in it. One was a power amplifier chip, and the other one was this weird IC. And I was like, I'm like, I wonder if there's like a data sheet on this. So I looked it up, and I actually surprisingly found it, because the chip's like long out of production. And I said, okay, I want to experiment with this. Let me see what happens if I put a guitar through it. Because back then when I boxed up that thing, I had stopped playing guitar at that point. I had, long, moved on to electronics and tape and stuff like that, to create music. So I desoldered the chip and put it in my breadboard and wired it up according to the data sheet, and hooked it all up and turned it on, powered it up, and played guitar through it. And I was fucking floored. The chip has this noise gate built into its input, I guess, so that when you're using the megaphone, it doesn't like feedback, like acoustic feedback from it being like super amplified for, sound in the air, as opposed to like electrical through like a pickup or something. So when you start playing, it breaks through that noise gate, and you hear this very noisy, hissy, slowed down, warped tape effect. Like, it literally sounds like you press play on like an old tape that's you're playing on like a busted up tape deck. And I was just like, this is awesome and terrifying, and it like instantly like brought to mind like all these like short horror stories I had read, like these various passages that would always like that I would stick in my head for, you know, all these like early 20s, like this Robert Bloch story called like Secret in the Tomb. There's like at the end of it, the main character's going through the woods at night. It's like this moonlit night, and he's talking about the sound of the wind and there's like a stream that's running through the woods. It looks like blood to him, and he goes to this tomb of his ancestor. And, you know, of course, this is like early 20th century horror story, you know, from like Weird Tales kind of stuff. And it's, you know, just full of descriptive text, you know, to the extreme. Same, you know, like H.P. Lovecraft and stuff, which I love. It's just so, you know, it's like I love what's like that someone's trying to like paint this picture so clearly. But there's anyway that that end of the story always had this sound to it, especially like there's this when he opens up this tomb of his ancestor who was like a wizard or something, you know, sorcerer, and what's in it is this crypt is this like half human, half demon, devil looking thing that's alive, and it starts to like open its mouth and speak, and he describes the sound as sounding like the hissing of a black slug, and that always had this like very like unnerving sound in my head, and like this kind of nailed that sound, and I was like flipping out, just like I was just so excited, like big ass grin on my face. And so I just started messing with it, and I like messed with it, and, you know, I did my thing with the chip. You know, let me see what happens when I do this, and when I do this, and I started finding all these things, you know, by like, okay, if I don't filter the power supply, or if I feed it different amounts of voltage, like it does this, and it does this, and at this pin, there's a, you know, like the other, it's like this, like lo-fi, dirty, noisy version of whatever you're putting into the chip. It's not like the modulated sound. And what the chip does, like this pseudo pitch shifting, it's more like ring modulation. You know, it's kind of like in between pitch shifting and ring modulation. So it's awesome. It's like every note is like out of tune, and but it really has this great, like, slowed down tape effect. You can also make it go higher, but that's more distinctly ring modded. I mean, it's also, you know, it does sound like the pitch is being shifted up, but I was more interested in like the the pitch down effect. It just sounded so like I said, like unnerving and like nightmarish sound, and, you know, the working, you know, when I come up with a new circuit, I come up with a name, but it's not always the name I'm going to use. It's just whatever pops into my head that's connected to it. And this one I put burial chamber because it just, like, you know, between that story and the sound, it just had this like very, like, you know, dark, scary, you know, thing going on. So anyways, I was experimenting with it and finding like various parameters and putting in like a preamp circuit, and just like I said, just various things, like, you know, like having, whether the power supply is filtered or unfiltered, and, you know, what it does. And I was getting all these crazy sounds that was never meant to, you know, have. And then, you know, like I always, like I was kind of alluding to earlier, like I don't try to like come up with a circuit that does something. I hear something that the circuit is just doing on its own, and I kind of steer it in directions. But I steer it, I see what it does, and then I keep going. So I'm like working with it. You know, I'm like, I've always said, like, there's always this like unknown force involved in my design work. Because I'm just like opening myself up to whatever comes in and like guides me, and not, you know, it's not necessarily this clear thought in my head of doing something. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just like I'm urged, or just like, you know, pushed in a direction, and I let that happen. I don't like, because I learned if I fight it, if I try to bend something completely to my will, it just doesn't turn out good, and it also like frustrates the hell out of me, and like makes me like really just gives me anxiety. So I've learned to like let it be, and that ends up working. You know, my best work came after I came to that realization that I had to like I said, like keep myself open to outside influences, or, you know, influences from my subconscious, or whatever the hell it is that's at work there. And so the Dolmen was born, and I built the first prototype. I looked at it before I did this video in 2013, and then shortly after that I did another prototype. I updated it. You know, I had come up with a early control voltage circuit for the shift function, because, you know, I was like, this is, you know, when I was playing it, every time I would always be manually, you know, adjusting the frequency of the pseudo pitch shifting thing. And I'm like, okay, I need to be able to adjust that while I'm playing. So I was like, I'll have some kind of like expression pedal type thing, but I wanted it to be a control voltage, because I would, you know, I was already, like I said, I was done, had stopped playing guitar except for designing. And I'm like, oh, wouldn't I be able to put a control voltage from, you know, a modular synthesizer system? But in particular, I wanted to have some kind of expression pedal type thing going on. So I'll get to that later. So I built another prototype, and, you know, it had a lot of what is on the pedal now. And I was going to release it. You know, I had a buddy of mine, Nate, working with me at the time, and we had plans on, you know, we got graphics done, and we had plans on putting it out, but I was in the throes of my excessive alcoholism, simple way to put it, and my life was kind of falling apart, and everything just got shelved, and I just moved on. And fast forward to maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, I busted out the prototype, and I'm playing on it, and I hadn't played on it in a long time, and I was like floored again. I was just like, man, this is so good. And it was like, I was shocked that after so much time had gone past, that there wasn't more that I wanted to change about it. It was that good that it was like, you know, and I am so critical of my work. in a lot of ways. I just like, it needs to have a certain, like, it needs to satisfy a list of things, like a criteria for, what, one of my creations needs to have for me to actually release it into the world. Like it's some kind of, horrible monster. So yeah, it was just, but I breadboarded the circuit because I was like, I need to experiment now, because now I've learned so much more than I did when I first, had designed the circuit. So I sat down and I made a lot of little adjustments, just refinements, and then some additions, and I started making new prototypes, and each one I was like, you play on it, it's not until like you prototype something, or at least for me, I prototype something and play on it that I really can tell what the way it works, and because otherwise it's on a breadboard and it's just, even when I have like pots plugged into it so I can turn them, and toggle switches on wires and stuff, I can, it has the controls, but it's still not the same thing. And so I'm, at that point I come up with other changes I want to make, or tweaks, or things I want to try out. So that I was going through a bunch of those, and I improved the control voltage circuit. The original one was kind of inverted, so that when more voltage made the pitch go lower, and by then I knew how, I figured out how to fix that. But yeah, just like a lot of other things, and I go over, like I will literally have like a toggle switch with two different components for like the same, for one component in a circuit, and I'll flick it back and forth, and it'll be slightly different, and I'll do that over and over again until I'm sure that the one is better than the other, or which one is better, even though it's like such minuscule little things, like stuff that most people would never even hear a difference, but it drives me crazy, of course. And I figure that there's a cumulative, I can't speak, effect to all those little refinements, that even when people don't hear something or are conscious of something, it like, their subconscious like enjoys it. Anyway, getting off here. So I came up with that. I added, figured out a just clever little way of allowing you to have an external like gate clock or whatever to switch the form from 1 to 2 or from 1 to 3, and I added, I changed the send switch, was kind of like a range switch. And last but not least, well, it might not be last, but I think, there's so many things, there's so many different sounds that this circuit can create, this pedal that can create, depending on how you have the controls set. It's very much like, I keep saying it, but it's very much like an analog synthesizer, right? And when I say that, I always think of my Pro 1, which is funny because that's where these graphics, that style of graphics came from, or, from what inspired them. But, it's one of those preset synthesizers, although there's like a routing section, but it's not like a patch bay. But it's one of those things where it's like, each section has the traditional controls for, there's two envelopes. There's one for the filter, and there's one for the VCA, and you can also route that to the VCOs. But you know, it has individual controls, and if you don't know what you're doing, like, you can get to the point where there's no sound coming out of the synthesizer, and you can turn knobs all you want because there's one knob that's not set right. But depending, you know, you can get a million different sounds out of it depending on how you have the controls set. And the controls are, you know, kind of interactive. On here, the controls are extremely interactive. So it's like programming, you know, like an early microprocessor-based computer where you're flicking switches, you know, data switches to feed the microprocessor a word. So it's like, really, there's a massive amount of sounds, because when you have this and this and this, suddenly this control does something different, or this control does something different, which is what I love, and which is what is so why I love this design so much, because that's what that's what I love about when I have a design that I really love. It's because it has so much depth to it, and it can do so many things, and you can explore it. You know, like, that's such an important thing to me, and it's so much of this comes back to my ADHD, which is generally a horrible fucking thing in my life, always has been, but it, you know, it kind of leads at least others to good things, I hope, because I can give people something interesting, you know, to inspire them to play music. But I want, you know, I want equipment that I can keep finding new sounds with, because if I once I master something, figure it out, I become bored with it, because I'm like, I know how to do it, you know, it becomes easy, and it's just not like, there's nothing new to it. So my designs, since I design them for myself, first off, always have to have that element to them. And, you know, fortunately, hopefully, people dig that too. You know, if not for the same reason, but for other reasons. You know, same reason as it's for me. But anyway, so where was I going with this? Yeah, so you can get a lot of different sounds, and at some point, I realized that the circuit on the breadboard and one of the other earlier prototypes had this particular thing that some settings had in the background, this squealy, whistly sound. It was like, it's like that sound of like a shortwave radio, like, being tuned, and it's like noise and this like kind of pitched whistle and squealy thing going on like underneath in the background. And I was like, fuck, that's right, that they do that. Why doesn't this new prototype do that? So I'm like, I go, and I'm like, it must be something I'm missing, like some, you know, connection or part or something. So I went through the breadboard circuit, you know, because that I can pull the parts out, measure them, and really know if the part is what I think it is, the same value and everything. Nothing was different. The prototype, I'm like, the prototype does it. So, you know, like on the breadboard, you know, there can be certain little things, because the breadboard is not the perfect environment for a circuit. There's like stray capacitance and all these things that can affect very sensitive circuits. But I was like, well, this prototype I made, like, that does it too. And so I'm like ripping that apart, trying to figure out like what, you know, and that was a mess of like boards and wires, and it, you know, my prototypes that are not built with like printed circuit boards are like wild nests, because I just like need to get it done. Like, I don't need to make it look pretty because it's for me, you know. Same thing with my breadboarding. It's funny when I see people like who breadboard like on like videos where it's like the wires are like perfectly straight and right angles and stuff, and I'm like, how can you enjoy it if you're like thinking about it, making it look nice? Now, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's probably good because you don't have like all these signals like hanging out in space and essentially antennas, which is what I'm getting to right now. So I'm like depressed and stressed that I can't figure out what's creating that squealy sound, because I love that, and I just forgot about it because the circuit does so many other crazy sounds that my brain just like pushed the one thing in the background because it wasn't in the foreground long. That's part of having ADHD too. It's like you forget things so easily because so many thoughts are happening that some thoughts just have to get pushed out of the way to make room for, your head being jam-packed with like these multiple like, lines of, parallel universes and stuff. So I'm like just going over and just messing with things and trying things and measuring things. And at some point, the circuit on the breadboard had a lot of toggle switches, like on like stiff wire, so they're kind of just hanging and stuff. And at one point, I moved this one toggle switch on wires out of the way to like get to something, another part of the circuit on the breadboard, and the sound went away. I was like, okay, what happened? And then I took my hands away and I'm like moving stuff, and there it was again. And I'm like, I realized that when this one toggle switch that was connected to the input, the preamp that goes into this chip, when it's plugged into I might have been the input cap or something. I was switching back and forth between two different ones. But when those wires lay over into this other part of the circuit, that's really sensitive part of like the chip and everything, the sound popped up. And what I realized was that preamp is really sensitive because it's has this massive amount of gain in it. So it's picking up some of like the weird high frequency clock noise on one part of the circuit, feeding it into the preamp, which goes back into the chip and creates this feedback loop. So it's like an antenna picking up whatever it can and sending it in and sending it out, and it's doing this thing, So I was like, okay, let me see how I can, and the prototype did that because it was such a fucking mess. So I'm like, well, am I going to have to like have like all these like traces, like just big wires that I like randomly put in here? Because I would absolutely do it. But what I realized was I could attach a wire, like I rigged up one of the prototypes with the piece, that had a PCB. I connected a long wire to the preamp circuit and then just kind of laid it on the rest of the circuit board, and there it was. Now, it was a little different, and it created other side effects that I'll get into once I tell you about when I go over the actual controls. But, it just makes this all that much better when it has like this deep history for me that, where it's like, these ups and downs and struggles and accomplishments and, so that's, the story of how this came to be. Now, another addition or change to the pedal that I did recently that created a whole new thing that's related to this, what I was just talking about, is this other control here. It brings in this lo-fi, noisy, distorted version of the input, like I was explaining earlier, which is like, again, it's a pin on the chip that's not supposed to be for used by the user of this chip, but it's actually part of this whole other thing going on, because it's the one artifact switch filters this stuff there, and it just, it's funny because everything had to be the way it is for this to be the way it is. Like, without one of the components, not literal components, but components of the design, whether it's, this control or that control or whatever, it wouldn't do half the shit that it does. And so because this is not part of the modulation circuit or the modulating circuit, it's almost like a separate thing. Like, I guess I'll just get into the controls at this point, rather than start talking about one control and jump around and stuff. Yeah, okay, I'm just gonna do it. I don't care. So everything in this box here, the black knobs, that's part of the modulation circuit. This is essentially a clean blend that runs in parallel with the modulation circuit, and then this is like that goes to a mixer, and this controls essentially the output of the mixer by controlling the input to the power amplifier. But I'll get into that in a bit. So I wanted people to be able to put, say, a megalith in front of this pedal and have it on and have it not overload the crap out of the circuits in here because of the volume and low end from the megalith just being too much for it. So what I did was designed each of the circuits to have a volume control at their inputs, an attenuator. So the drive control is essentially a volume control in the front of going into the preamp that drives the modulation circuit. So that way you can adjust now this control, it has a lot of effect on the outcome of everything. First of all, the circuit has a noise gate effect going on inside, to it. So, which is how it gets that kind of start-stop of tape effect. So this controls kind of the sensitivity, how hard you have to hit for it to break over that noise gate, and how long the note will ring out before the new noise gate clamps it. But it also, as you turn it up, it makes the output of the modulation circuit louder, and as you turn it up, it starts to push the input of the modulation circuit so hard that it kind of takes over the sound, and then the modulation is less articulate, which is cool because because you can adjust that, you can use that to your advantage as another way to tune the circuit to be the way you want. So it's an important control to set right for what you want. We have the form switch. Now, you see the switches, they're numbered in Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. I numbered them in a way that if you put all the switches at 1, that's a good starting point and a good place where I essentially the main setting. How do I say this? Like, I designed the circuit to work the best with a certain, going for a certain sound. I mean, I designed it so that it sounds good no matter what, but it's hard to explain. But whatever, probably not even that important. So position 1 is, this is like the modulation type, essentially. Position 1 is the pseudo pitch shifting effect. Position 2 is this like scrambled alien voice version of that. It's very weird, and like, you can't really hear the pitch of a note. I mean, you hear changes when you go from note to note, but it's this like scrambled, scary, like wobbly, like demon voice kind of effect. You'll hear it. And then 3 is kind of like defeats the modulation effect. And it's just this kind of distorted, lo-fi, ugly sounding version of the whatever you're sending into it. And then, like, the shift no longer does anything. But it does. If you have certain other controls set a certain way, and these artifact switches, they have like a different effect on the sound than they do when the form switches in 1 or 2. Like I said, very interactive stuff going on. The shift. This is the frequency of the pitch shifting effect. Now, the pitch shifting effect is all, like I said, is geared towards it being a pitch down effect. But at each, and then this is, I have to kind of talk about these together, because this is kind of like a range control, where you can drop the frequency down. But it also does, each of those positions also have their own kind of effects that the others don't. So it's not just dropping the frequency down a certain amount. There's also something else involved in each one. Each one has its own special little, like, quality, I guess you'd say. And position 1 is the highest, and that, like, right at noon is, like, where it's not shifting it up or down. So it's like, if you get it just set right, you don't really hear a modulation effect. And then if you go clockwise, it goes up, and counterclockwise, it goes down. And then when you switch to 2, that kind of unity frequency range or setting is like more like over here. So you have just a little bit of up shift and a lot down. And then when you go to 3, it slows things down so much, because the chip's essentially like doing this like very like 8-bit sampling effect type thing. It's for a toy, so they didn't make it high fidelity. It just needed to have a gimmicky thing to it. Not that I think this is gimmicky at all, but meaning like the original purpose. Like I said, I repurposed this fucking chip to death, man. Exploited every possibility of it. So yeah, it just like it slows things down so much, it just like rips it apart into pieces, like, because it's like the bits are just too far apart, and the bit rate's so low that it's like it's just no longer, sounds like what it is, because there's just not enough, what's the word? Not definition. What's the word when you're talking about resolution? That's what it is. Doesn't have enough resolution for you to have it contain the enough of the character of the original sound. And so shift, when you hit shift 2, the frequency of the modulation goes from this control to either, if you don't have anything plugged into this shift 2 CV, a trim pot inside that you can manually set. So you essentially can have a preset shift, you can set, if you want to be able to step on this switch and have it be like this, the knob is here, you can adjust it in that trim pot inside to be there. And then when you shift it back, it goes back to, this control. Or if you have something plugged in to this jack, it's whatever control voltage you're sending into it will control the shift. And because I designed this little box called the CVX that you patch with a passive volume pedal, you can, do the thing that I wanted to do when I first started experimenting with this circuit, was so you can play guitar with it or play whatever you want to put through it, and then use your foot to, tweak the, you can make it sound like the tape is like slowing up and, slowing down and going into another dimension, and it's pretty awesome. And then, again, you just have to switch this and it goes back to, just using this control for it. The artifact switches. They do things in the circuit that if I told you what they did, I'd have to kill you. No, it just wouldn't have a connection to what you're hearing. So it might just make it more confusing because you're trying to wrap your head around why this is related to this. Because if I tell you like, oh, this is filtering this part of the circuit, well, it's not doing a filtering type effect. It's, creating feedback, or it's creating like weird noise artifacts. So as I said, okay, I'll just call them all the same thing and then just tell people the effect that they have. So artifact 1, this was the last control I added to the circuit, and this is what connects the two different antennas to the preamp circuit. That one that does a squealy, weird, whistly thing. And the one antenna is just a straight antenna, and I wrap it around this certain part of the PCB, path or whatever you want to call it. And that's position 3. Position 1, it's not connected to anything, but there's some funny, weird, awesome, strange thing that occurred that I've never experienced before that I'll tell you about in a minute. So there's position 3 is this long antenna. That one does the most. The other one is a wire that the antenna is a wire wrapped around like a crystal point, just to have something, because I have crystal points lying all over the fucking place for some reason. Just to have, because when you coil an antenna, it's different than just having it straight out, but it's also a way to make a long antenna short. That's why when you see those little stubby antennas on like phones or like walkie-talkie type things, that's there's wire coiled around some kind of core. So I just, was like, okay, I need to have I want to have two different kinds of effect. I want to definitely have the one that does it's the thing that I like the most, and then the other one does something slightly different. So 2 is just a very subtle version of it. And when those are in position 2 or 3, how you have this shift control set, again, another very interactive, weird thing. You can I'll show you, when sound's going on, you can dial it in it's like dialing in like a radio receiver. It's like you find these spots where this sound gets real loud and intense, and then it gets more subtle, and then you find another spot. It's like tuning it to different channels. It's just far out. It's just it's one of the many things that I love about this is that it has these weird things that I didn't anticipate being there. I just designed the pedal and put it together, and then as I explore it, I find new sounds. Like, I'm still finding new sounds from this thing that, after, a year of playing on it. There's just certain, settings that everything has to be set that way for that, unique sound to pop up. And then every other setting has its own unique sound. Artifact 2, essentially when these are in position 1, they're kind of not doing anything. It's like they're doing something. They're leaving the circuit be, and then when they're in position 2 or 3, they're adding or subtracting something from the circuit. I don't know if that's really helpful or not, but it's not, like I always say, nothing innovative is going to be intuitive. People, I see reviews of gear, and a lot of reviewers seem to think that a piece of gear should have the control set, the interface should have an intuitive quality to it, meaning like you just naturally understand what things do. But if it's something new and it's something innovative, meaning something, ahead of what's already out there, it's not going to be that way, because by its nature, something innovative is not going to be intuitive, because you're going to have to learn it's new, it's different. It has to be new and different for it to be what it is, so it always kind of frustrates me. I understand, like, some gear it needs to be that way, because, if you're buying some kind of, like, a piece of gear, like a piece of recording equipment or a mixer or something that's like more of a utility, like, you don't want it to be like too esoteric, because it's not a tool that you use in that way. You want it to just bend to your will. You're not looking for it to necessarily inspire you. You're looking for it as a tool to, manifest your vision, But whatever. I'm going off on tangents as usual. So when it's in position 1, it's just kind of the circuit's fairly stable. 2, it starts to destabilize things. So things start to kind of get all volatile, and you'll throw a sound into the circuit and it reacts in a strong way, and you can I forgot to mention something about the shift control. That's going to lead up to what I'm about to say. So remember when I said there's a setting right around here? Now, some of the early ones, it might be more like here. I figure out a way to get it so that unity frequency when in descend 1 position is at noon, whatever. If you put it in that position, it doesn't really, have any weird modulation effect to it. I mean, it's noisy and weird and lo-fi and stuff. But if you bring in this parallel control, which is just a very super duper clean version of whatever is going into the pedal, it creates this chorus effect, like a very, straight up chorus effect, which is crazy, because chip was certainly never meant to do that, but it was also not meant to have a parallel circuit. What's going on, I believe, is that because of how the chip does its effect, there's a slight delay, a very short delay, which is exactly what a chorus is. A chorus is when you take and you delay a chip, as in like, echo, analog delay, kind of delay. You delay it very short, so it's not like a noticeable like repeat kind of echo effect, but it's so short that when lined up with when you combine it, it's one of those effects. Like if you hear it on its own, you don't notice anything unless it's wide enough that like you're hitting a note and then you're hearing the note later. But when you pair it up, and there's also like a difference in phase between the signal going through it, the signal going through the parallel preamp, and so there's a delay between those two. So you get this, like, depending on just how close, like, you can almost get it so that the chorusing effect stops if you get it just in this right spot, but pretty much every other, it's hard to do, and why would you do it anyway? It creates this, chorusing effect, and the more this is off center, from that like same frequency, the more intense the wobble gets, and it's kind of like a vibrato like pitch, wavering effect. And so when you put the artifact switch in position 2 or 3, and you have that going on, it turns into flanging, which is cool because it's, like I said, it's already this tape. It sort of has this like weird manipulated tape effect. Not that that's what was going for. I mean, it's what like I heard, but I wasn't going to try to design it just to be that kind of effect, because that's not how any of my stuff is. I don't go and try to do, whatever it is that people want me to do or whatever. It's like I just want to find something. I want it to be different, even if it's like this kind of thing. I want it to be its own thing. So anyway, but it does this like, and it's a very noisy effect, but it's like this. It's totally like flanging because you're destabilizing the circuit in a way that adds feedback, which is how a flanger is. Like if you add feedback to the delayed chorus, with a chorus effect, you get flange. The difference between a chorus circuit, like an analog, I'm talking about analog right now, but an analog chorus and a analog flange, they're almost the exact same circuit essentially, except the flanger has a feedback path that intensifies that effect that's going on. Sorry, I spit on anyway. And in position 3, it's like it just completely destabilizes shit, and it just starts squealing, and it just like it starts oscillating, and you have a whole other, like all the controls suddenly have a whole other dimension to them where they're doing something different now with like that destabilized state of the circuit. And last but not least, this artifact switch is connected to this control in a way. It's funny because, just like I was saying, if I tell you what this does, it's not going to relate to what it does to the sound. It kind of does, but this essentially filters an area of the circuit when it's in position 2 or 3. But most of the time when you put it in position 2 or 3, instead of and when I'm saying filtering right now, I'm talking about low pass filtering, where it cuts high kind of filtering. It does the exact opposite. When you put it in position 2 or 3, it makes it like the sound like brighter and crisper and hissier. But it does create a low pass filtering effect to the signal that that you bring in when you bring up the other control, so that like lo-fi distorted version of the input signal will get low pass filtered essentially. And back to artifact 1, the one that connects the antenna, there's one thing I'm just gonna wait till I demonstrate the pedal to talk to you about this crazy thing that does it. I'm like still fascinated by. Recently, in the past handful of builds of the Dolmen, I decided I'd change the value of this pot. I'd make it slightly bigger, like really small difference, but I thought it would make it so that, you know, when you bring this up, like I said, it brings in this other signal, but it's still governed by this control. I guess I kind of skipped that over. This is the output of the modulation circuit that feeds into the mixer and the output amp circuit. So when this is all the way down, none of these will do anything. None of these, because you've shut off the signal coming from this circuit. So when you bring it up, but since there's not a separate control for this sound and the modulation, it's fortunate that as you turn this control up, the modulation effect starts to come down a bit. So you can essentially set this, it's almost like a balance control. So if you want the modulation to be way louder than the signal coming from here, you can, or if you want them to be a little equal, or if you want this to be a little bit louder, you can't completely defeat the modulation effect, but there's not really a reason to have it that way, because you can set it another way, and you can put it like the form position 2, and you'll kind of have that sort of thing. But anyway, so I changed the value of that, and just thinking it would just give me a little bit more like room for this to like overpower the modulation, and that might be favorable in some situation. I didn't think it would do much really, but that's me. I like to fine tune shit, get it just right. But what I found out afterwards, and for a split second, I was like, uh-oh, I fucked something up. I noticed when this artifact switch is in position 2 or 3, when it connects to those antennas, and you have this turned up, that signal that comes in when you bring this up becomes gated and crumbly and broken sounding. I'm still not sure why that happens now that I changed that value, but at first I was like, oh shit, I fucked up. And I'm like, no, that's just a whole nother level of fucked upness that this pedal has. So I'm like, it stays. And you can defeat it by putting this switch in position 2 or 3. So, like I said, man, this thing has so many different sounds, and you just need to learn like the combination to the lock that that unlocks these sounds. It's like the perfect device for someone like me. Anyway, so yeah. Speaking of the form, when you put it in position 3, when it like kind of defeats the modulation, like I said, this doesn't do really anything, but it does. If you have first of all, depending on how you have these 3 artifact switches, it does this weird, like hollow, almost resonant ringing filter type effect to it. And then in some positions, it brings in this sound that sounds exactly like, totally like acoustic feedback, like meaning like feedbacking from like through the air, speaker, microphone, or pickup or whatever, one picking up the other and feeding it back. It sounds just like that, but it's not. It's inside, but it's amazing because I've never heard like internal feedback that actually sounded just like acoustic feedback, because acoustic feedback has this very distinctive quality to it that you know as soon as you hear it. But also when you have it in certain positions, remember I told you, like, with the antenna squealy sound, that the shift control has like spots in it where it like dials in this weird crazy sound that the antennas bring in. Well, you can it does something similar when this is in position 3 and these are set just so, where you can like adjust this and you'll bring in this like noisy, like, little chaotic sound to it. Which is awesome, because I want everything to do something all the time. Like, I want it to like just have so many possibilities, because then everyone can find a sound that is for them, that they can get their own unique sound. And it's not the kind of pedal, it's not, certainly not a one-trick pony. I mean, it's all very, fucked up and lo-fi and hot. It's funny because I spent so much time making this pedal be like high fidelity, but high fidelity in its low fidelity. Meaning, like, I want it to have the sounds that it does. I want you to be able to hear every little nuance of that sound, like have it just which is why, and I'll get to it in a second, I made the output a power amp. But let me just finish up with the modulation section. The presence, this is, as you turn it counterclockwise, it kind of like shadows over the signal coming out of here, including this and the modulations. It's just like a low-pass tone control type of thing. That, it's like I said, it just takes away the presence of the sound, so you can kind of like mellow it out. And, if you want to have, basically the sound that you're putting into it with a little bit of sound in the background, all kind of smoothed over, you can. Or if you want to just like tame some of the noise that happens, it's more often than not, like, this section is quiet when you're not, the stuff coming out of this part of the circuit is quiet when you're not playing. But when you bring this other in, it brings in a hiss, which is awesome. It's like, just like another awesome element. But if you want to like smooth that over, you can use this control for that. And so, yeah, so we already went, the parallel is just, there's a amplifier, preamp circuit that runs in parallel with the modulation circuit, and this is the control at the input of it. So that way, as you bring it up, it brings up the level of that clean, unaffected, like dry, versus wet signal. And even if something's driving this, it will never you won't have to worry about it distorting. Like these three controls you think of as the mixer. This is from the modulation circuit. This is, the wet, the dry, and then this is the master control that these go into a mixer that feed into the input of a power amplifier. The reason I used a power amplifier, I kind of guess that I must have used it because that was one of the ICs in the original like box from the megaphone thing. I don't remember exactly why, but I know why. I don't know why I thought about it, but why I kept it in there at least is because it's a power amplifier. It amplifies and you're putting it into a situation where you're not powering a speaker, which is what a power amplifier is for powering a speaker, whereas a preamp is just for connecting circuits to, separate circuits together and stuff. It like pulls on the sound and amplifies it makes the sound like every little thing articulate, and like every note is like really punchy, because it's like, even though you're controlling the output, so it's not, just smashing whatever you're putting the pedal into, which is why I made it an input control rather than the output, because this way it won't get distorted. I guess if you cranked both of these up, no, because then you'd have to crank this up, and this will, if you plug, like I said, I put it in there just so that it makes it more articulate and punchier, and like it makes the low end like shake shit. If you plug the output of this into a speaker cabinet and you start turning this up, it will come out of whatever you put in this will come out in the speaker cabinet. So you can use this as a head if you're in desperate. It's not deafeningly loud because it's meant for driving like a little speaker, but I put it in my 412 old acoustic cabinets, like loud as fucking shit, and it's decent volume. It's not the most. I wouldn't buy the pedal for that reason. That's kind of like a freebie thrown in as a result. So yeah, the only downfall is there's a very small bit of like idle hiss, but most of the time the pedal is creating, kind of intentionally creating these like sounds that, these like noise artifacts and stuff. So it's, and like I said, it's very minimal. I don't know why I'm even saying it. It's probably just stupid of me, but that's the way I am. And so there's also controls on the inside. There are 4 trim pots, okay? First, there's one that looks different than the other 3, okay? Don't touch that one. It looks completely different. It has a little metal set screw on top of it. That is not meant for anybody but me to touch. And that fine-tunes the CV control for this. If you mess with it, it will wonk out all the CV control for the shift. And right now it's set so that it goes from 0 to 5 volts plus, sweeps the entire range of the shift frequency. There's a shift 2, it says it right underneath of the trim pot, and it's kind of trim pot that has like a kind of round thing on top with like a X kind of cut into it, like Phillips head kind of screwdriver. You can use a regular small flathead. That sets the shift 2 when there's nothing plugged into here. You turn this on, it sets the shift frequency, the modulation frequency. So you can set that to where you want. I set it so that right now when you switch it on, it's like putting this in the center. So if you want to get like that chorusing flange effect instantly, you can hit that and it'll set it right there. Then there's a trim pot that says sub. That's a low cut for the output of the modulation circuit, because the low end can be kind of like overwhelming. So if you don't want that much low end and you want to like maybe have like the articulation a little bit like clearer or something, like if your amp or whatever is just, like mine has like massive low end like dialed in, so I set it so that it's pretty much at full, except I back it off just a hair. So if for some reason like if you're recording and you're like, oh, that low end is just like too much. I don't know why you would say that, but you can always adjust it. And then the other trim pot, I think it says line in. That's for this input here, this 3.5 millimeter 1/8 inch jack input. That's an attenuated input for like coming from like a VCO or something from like a modular system that's like, you know, so loud it would just, you know, annihilate the input even with this set low. I essentially use just like a VCO from my modular system. I plug it into there, and then I set the attenuation so that it's essentially set so you can take a strong signal like that, and it will be the same as you know, a passive guitar pickup signal. You know, it'll be that level. That way you can use the pedal as a synth module, because the output certainly has enough power to it. If it can drive a speaker, it can drive any synth module. And that there's also an 1/8 inch jack here. Yeah, that's one of those things. Like, I made it a particular kind of pot so that the user can use it if they need. You know, if you're really using it a lot with something with a hot signal, and you feel like it needs to have more or less, you know, attenuation, you can change it. But otherwise, I would just keep it as is. Really, only the Shift 2 one is the one that you'd really, you know, want to set it to your particular taste. But I ship it, like I said, with it in that like center frequency, so you can get that chorus effect when you hit it. And lastly, there is a little dip switch inside. When it's in the on position, if you unplug a plug from the input jack, the big 1/4 inch input jack, because it doesn't. This jack is a switching jack, so when you unplug it, it connects a feedback loop that runs through a part of the circuit, and it turns the pedal into a synthesizer, and you can get like just crazy berserk, synth sounds and like noises and. And it depends on how you have the control setting, because, when you're working with like a internal feedback loop, like no input mixing kind of thing, which is funny because that's, the pedal has its origins in my like harsh noise rig that was sent through, this like old Radio Shack mixer. Everything I have is Radio Shack, or was. So you'll learn like, when you're using it like that, these controls do this, and then it all goes to the output. So this doesn't affect this is still a master volume for it in that mode as well, rather than if you just connected a feedback loop like externally with this, then this would affect it as well. But I wanted it to be like, a more legit like synth. You get some great like classic synth sounds, and then a bunch of like noisier, harsher, low end drones, and it's awesome. But I put the switch in there for two reasons. First of all, I ship it with it in the off position, because then if you're not going to use it in that mode ever, I don't want someone having the pedal plugged into their amp and then they're going to yank this out without thinking, and then suddenly the pedal is like on and blasting. There's probably not many situations where that would happen, but I just want it. These are the things I think about, every little tiny fucking thing with all my stuff. And more importantly, if you're plugged into this jack and nothing is plugged into here, this jack is not switched because there was really no way for me to have both of them switched and have them do the same thing. So if you want to plug into here and not have it oscillate, you have to have that switch on the off position. But there is the added advantage that if you are sending it through here and you still want the feedback loop going, so you have it going and doing its thing, and then you want to send a signal through that feedback loop to interact with it, you can. You just have to have it go through the 1/8 inch jack. Okay, I think that's it as far as the controls and stuff, without, the next level where I show you what things do and then talk your ear off about that, by demonstrating. I put a lot into this thing. I really did. I keep saying it over and over and over and over again, but this is like my finest work right now. I hope to outdo myself, but it's, it has like all the things I love most about my design work in it and what I want. I want my devices to be, I don't want them to be a kind of thing that does everything or bees everything, because I want it to have a vision. I want my gear to have a vision to it, its own thing, and its own, direction in a way. But I also do want it to be something that's oh, I can use this as a guitar pedal to do this, or a guitar pedal to do this, or I can use it as a synth to do this, or I can use it at, I want my stuff, and fortunately, my design approach kind of lends to that, because, like I said, I keep it open, and that's why whenever I build a prototype of anything, I end up finding all these other uses for it, because that I wasn't anticipating, because I just designed it in a certain way that, like I said, lends itself to it being able to do other things. I'm not even sure. I've tried to actually think about what is it that makes all these designs that I'm sitting on, unfortunately, instead of putting out there, like that, because they all have this multi-purpose thing that shows itself, once I build a prototype and it's there. So anyway, that's for another video, I guess. The only other thing, and it's something that I love that probably no one cares about, the LEDs. This LED moves to the sound going through, it's on the output, the output of the modulation circuit. Is it just the modulation? Wait, where is it at? Anyway, it flutters and reacts to it. It's like a status of the sound kind of thing. And then this one, the brightness adjusts depending on either the internal control voltage where it's set, or if there's something external, if you put an LFO, the light will get brighter. And so I like I like that type of stuff. I like indicators. I like, multimedia kind of thing going on, where it's you're not just hearing the sound change, you're seeing what it's doing too. I think it just makes, the complete package, I guess. Alright, let's move on to some sounds.